All right, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, it's 4:30 p.m. It means it's not only the eve before Thanksgiving here in the US, it is also time for the office hours here on the Academy. I'm Johan, Andrew is Andrew, and will be your host for the next hour here, sharing updates and answer questions on pretty much anything related to MDT, ConfigMgr, Intune, Azure, PowerShell, and anything in between. So with that being said, let the show begin. All right, good to have you back, sir.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Good. Is the turkey ready?
One of them is, yes. The other one, I've got to wait till tomorrow morning. So I'm getting ready for Thanksgiving, but I'm also, you mentioned last week that you were going to have a surprise this week, and I want to know what it is.
Yes. So first of all, let me go ahead and steal the screen here for a second. And I can find my own little screen. That'll be fantastic. There we go. So on our Academy, we're releasing a brand new PowerShell course next year that focus on everyday automation, things that I typically do every day at work, but formatted into a course. And to celebrate the season, so to speak, we are starting about a few minutes ago a 24-hour countdown where that particular course is 50% off. So we rarely do discounts on the Academy, but this is your chance to sign up for the PowerShell course that kicks off in mid-January 2023. So that was my announcement.
Awesome.
But I know you have been preparing some stuff as well, or stumbled across a few things, I should say.
I have. So let me pull up some stuff here. This is good stuff. Are you running this course, Johan?
Let me see. You need to put out your screen.
Oh, yeah. And us. There we go. Hey.
There we are.
Are you running the fundamentals course?
That's mine. Yes.
Awesome. Very, very good. That's just being on part of the academy with you and following you for all these years. I picked up a lot of those little basic tips, or at least seemingly basic, but that really help improve my efficiency. And I'm not a developer or coder by trade, so that should be good stuff. I'm going to be looking forward to that one.
Sounds good.
All right. So a couple of updates that I wanted to share, little tidbits of information I came across over the last week. I did notice we've been talking a lot over the last year or so about the changes with the Microsoft Store, and noticed in the Intune Admin Center, when you go to add a Windows app now, the Microsoft Store app is now showing a legacy label. So I don't think that's any secret at this point of what's to come, that the store, as we know it, is in fact going away. But this is one of the first signs that I've happened to come across that is looking like it's pretty imminent here. I mean, we know it's supposed to be first half of next year. So I thought that was interesting. We had, since last week, the service release of Intune, a new service release of Intune 22.11 came out, and with it we saw the addition of organizational messages in preview, which look pretty interesting. A couple of different types of messages you can provide to your users that are on Windows 11. Looks like you can configure notifications that are sent to the taskbar, the notification area, or the Get Started app when they first enroll their device for the first time. So that was pretty cool. And this multiple administrator approval I thought was interesting as well. So there's this concept of having a secondary approver for certain administrative actions. And the example that they gave here was, let's say your organization's preparing for an app deployment, but you as an admin that may not be as close to the users or as close to the app, goes to deploy it. You could have another group of people that understand that application a little bit more, or the users you're deploying it to a little bit more, actually give them the ability to be a secondary approver, which I thought was pretty interesting. We also had last week we were running our mastering Intune course. And during that course, we discovered that there was a new setting in Azure AD. I'm going to pull up the Twitter thread for this. Got quite a bit of interesting traction on my tweet, and I think you quote tweeted it and had it on LinkedIn. Lots of reactions and comments, kind of running the gamut from, what is this? How could we possibly do this? To, yeah, this is no big deal. They're just allowing you to control this. So basically what the setting was is, we can see here in the screenshot, this setting either enables or disables the ability for users in your tenant to create their own Azure AD tenants. And I think a lot of people were caught off guard because this has never been exposed to us as admins. So I would recommend going through some of the reading here. What I tweeted was, what's the use case for this? I think one of the most common things that I saw was for users in your tenant that you may want to have the ability to spin up a lab for development or something like that. Seemed to be the case. Yeah. And I know I have a question about that for you in a minute, Johan, but I did actually come across a tweet from Jeff Kazimer, who is a product manager, I believe, on Azure AD, or at least a lot of the, I follow him for a lot of the Azure AD identity information surrounding Azure AD, and he verified that this has in fact existed since the beginning. And the new setting here is simply giving admins control that they never had in the past. So it's just kind of interesting to me how this unfolded. And Johan, I know you were having a conversation about some of the potential things that could happen when somebody spins up one of your users spins up their own tenant.
Yeah, so I had a sort of a side thread to this going on with Matthias Melkersen, where he pointed out, okay, what if I have a user in tenant A that creates his or her own tenant B for dev, lab, test, something. And then an admin in tenant A deletes that user. Now there is nobody that can log in or access tenant B anymore, and that might be company resources in that tenant that I have been working with while they were employed. So I eventually pinged the Intune support alias on Twitter that looped me into the Azure support alias on Twitter. So I had an offline, or you say a DM section or thread with them earlier today, and they did confirm that should that ever happen, you can simply raise a support ticket. You have to claim that you indeed, in fact, own that tenant, and they will help you get access back to it. So they didn't say how quick that would be, but they said that they would help.
Well, that's promising. At least they will help us if we get in that situation.
I have it in writing.
Right, good to know.
As far as writing a DM goes, but
yeah, exactly. Anything else to add on that particular item?
no,
Okay.
that was pretty much it, I think. It was a good reading to read the comments. We had some Microsoft people chime in on the LinkedIn thread as well, so with some good comments, even from the product team. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, definitely. Great conversation. So then there was one more thing that I wanted to kind of call out today, just to hopefully get him a little bit more traction on this. Gary Blok has been putting together basically a list of safeguard items over here on GitHub. If we click through to this link, and some information on how to gather data on safeguards within your environment and things like that. And I happened to come across one of his tweets from yesterday, it looks like. Gary was just looking for some assistance from the community if you are a ConfigMgr admin, if you have the ability to go into your environment and run the CMPivot query to see if you have any additional safeguard IDs that Gary hasn't already recorded. I think that would be a big help to the community. So I just kind of wanted to call that one out as well.
Yeah, definitely. This is a good call for action. Simple run that query and send that information over to Gary, either as a tweet or, as he suggested, a nice little pull request on the repo, and it will help everybody. So fantastic.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think that's all I have for the moment.
All right. I stumbled across one little tiny thing. I happen to like the various Unify EdgeRouters. I've been using them for years in lab and test environments and whatnot. And they issued today a security bulletin. So I think I will bring that up on my screen here. It's basically a CVE. I forgot the number. Here we go. Down here, and it basically means that if you have a normal account or operator account on the machine, you can actually run admin commands with it, which is maybe not entirely ideal. I mean, it's helpful if you need to get stuff done, but I don't think that was the true purpose of it. So apply this hotfix. Some guidance I stumbled across earlier today about this, as it's a fairly large update. You may run out of space on the EdgeRouter. So if you do, delete previous packets from it if you have them stored since earlier. But of course, before you do the upgrade, do take another backup and store on your machine somewhere so you have it. But I figured it would be worth mentioning because it's quite a popular router out there. Been around for many years. Really good stuff. So that was my point on that. And I believe we have some questions coming in already. Let me see here. There's a question, does the discount include consulting as well? I'm sorry, nope. It's just the course that we're running for 24 hours, but a for effort or try.
I might have to use that coupon code if it was on consulting.
Yeah. Yes, it was asking for a link to the course. Yeah, that is fairly easy. It's just the Academy site. So I'll just reply with that real quick in the link here or in the chat. So all right, saving that one. Then there was a question from Matt that I got in actually a little bit before we started today even, but that is valid too. I don't mind. The question was regarding updating images in ConfigMgr. So the scenario is, okay, I have, let me go to one of my environments here, not that one, that's PowerShell script. But here, for example, I have a config manager set up. I have an OS image. And I'm assuming you guys can see this. Okay, yeah, it looks good on the stream. So I have a 21H2 image. This was one that I imported from another machine, but this one here is live. Say that this one was updated in September. And then came October or now November, and you want to replace that with a November image. And there are basically two schools of doing this. If you don't have any active deployment, or at least you can control when deployments are being active, there is absolutely no harm in just replacing the file in the package, the file that is in here. So in this folder, replace that file, go back to the package. If you want to see the updated information, you can simply go ahead and reload that info here in images, and it will update this info. And then you have to redistribute that package or update the DP for that package. For an hour or 5, you won't be able to deploy anything. But if you can control when and how deployments are done, maybe you're the only one doing it, right, fine, that works. But for most organizations, just replacing the file here may not give you the best result. Typically, it's easier to add in a new package with the updated image. Distribute it, wait until it's distributed, and then simply go into your sequence after the fact. And let me pick the sequence here, for example. And simply go to the OS step in the sequence and pick the new package here. Because updates to the sequence are almost instant. We were talking about 30 seconds typically to generate the policy, and then that new image is active in the environment, and you have not interrupted any ongoing deployments, and you have allowing users or admins throughout your company to still do OSD while you're replacing an updated image. Back in the days, it was very common that organizations spent a lot of time testing every image extensively before they went out. What you see in the last few years is that testing of the default image for Microsoft is usually not needed as much as it may have been in the past. Sure, it doesn't hurt to go through and just make sure it works on a few machines, but not if you're updating images every month and you're basing them off the updated Microsoft media. You usually don't have to put in that big of a test effort to just have them updated. So that's my take on that. Let's see, what else? It was a follow-up. We had this question actually coming up a few times. How to migrate BitLocker from AD to ConfigMgr. And for those of you who have been using Active Directory exclusively to manage your recovery keys, and you didn't have MBAM or anything like that, you're just using AD to store them on the computer object in Active Directory, it's simple as disconnecting those policies from AD and configuring the equivalent policies here in ConfigMgr. So in the endpoint protection area, this is where you go in and create a BitLocker management policy, preferably with the same type of setting that you had earlier in Active Directory. And just go through this with set those settings up. If you want a guide, we have showcased this one a few times. Maurice actually have a step-by-step guide on how to get this going. So up on MS Endpoint Manager, if you search for basically BitLocker, you can actually search for MBAM because it's the same process. The only difference is how you assign or what policies that you change, because if you had MBAM before, it was slightly different setup in the terms of policies that came down, but the concept still applies. Get rid of the Active Directory group policies and configure it in ConfigMgr instead. So we'll share this link in our link section that we always published after the office hours. And then, of course, our friend Niall at Windows Noob, we have showcased his guides plenty of times here on the Academy. As you may very well know, he's been a long timer in the ConfigMgr and Intune ecosystem or community, and he has literally hundreds of guides for ConfigMgr and Intune. And one of these set of guides is indeed for BitLocker management somewhere. Yeah, so here is for Intune. He has some for ConfigMgr as well. So great information regarding this. So highly recommend that. What else, Andrew?
Let's see. We've got a question coming in from LinkedIn. When moving Windows Update workload from ConfigMgr to Intune, do we need to remove the following registry settings for Windows Update for Business to fully function? And there's a follow-up that had some of the registry keys in it. If you want to share my screen for a minute, Johan, I can actually share. I wrote a blog post about this that had some of that information, as well as some links to some additional Twitter discussion, as well as a post from Microsoft talking about the registry keys and what needs to be set when migrating the Windows Update workload from ConfigMgr to Intune. And so just giving a quick glance at the registry keys in the chat, it looks like they're pretty similar, but I would recommend reviewing this blog post, and then if you're going through a larger migration, there is a post from MS Endpoint Manager here. I'm noticing a pattern with all of the work that they do for the community, Johan. This is a solution that uses log analytics and proactive remediations to track and remediate these registry settings. And there's a lot more. This is much more in-depth and complex than what I put together in my blog post. But this is a great solution to make sure that you have an understanding of which registry keys are related, how they need to be set, which settings have no effect, and how to report on that across your entire environment. So these would be the two posts that I would check out.
All right, awesome. I grabbed those links there. Okay, while you are doing that, there was a follow-up question coming in on LinkedIn as well. While you're in the sequence, can you show how to set machine name when building VM? I definitely can. Can I borrow the screen back, sir?
Oh, yes.
All right, I'm stealing it. So the question was how to apply a name when deploying machines. There are basically a few different ways of doing that in ConfigMgr. You can either pre-stage the information during deployment, you can have the system generate it, or you can ask for it. Pre-staging is fairly simple. You go into your assets and compliance workspace, you go to your devices. Here are my devices, and you can either import from a list, or you can import like a single computer where you simply punch in my PC 75, whatever name you want it, and you put in the MAC address for the device, and next finish. You add it to a collection, typically an OSD collection, And then when you deploy that device, sure enough, it's going to get that name. So that's when you do it in advance. And I've been doing that when I do a lot of redeployments for testing. So yeah, for example, I have a mass deployment OU where I probably have run a few thousand deployments over the years, but not for 1,000 computers, but maybe for a lot of these that has been reimaged over and over again for different scenarios. And I have been using a few of these like mass deployment collections where I just use the same name over. Generate is typically done through a script or a stored procedure or a web service something, or simply a code base that runs a part of your sequence to generate the name. But in terms of asking for it, it can be as simple as going to your collection, whatever that collection may be, for example, all unknown computers, and go to properties, go to collection variables, and add a variable, but do not define a value. Because if you do that, it's gonna stop and prompt you for the name during imaging. So that's elegant, I think. If you want a more nicer front end, there are plenty of front ends out there. The one we have showcased the most here on the Academy is Jason, is UI++. Poor Jason, he has to rename his blog again now with the rename of the... here is his UI++ solution. Been around for a long time. And you can control the wizard, but there is one of these wizard panes that gives you an option to specify computer name. In addition to much, much more, selecting applications and other settings for your imaging language and whatnot. Nikolai has one that is quite popular, been around for a long time. If I can type. This one obviously also allows you to specify computer name during deployment, but it can also be just a little PowerShell script that just pops up a little dialog box and say, hey, type in the computer name. And that's not too terrible much of a code to put together either. Even good old HTA pages will do just fine to ask for a computer name, or God forbid VB script also works. But yeah, so that's pretty much my answer to that question. What else do we have, Andrew?
Let's see. We're getting a question from YouTube. How can I start to deploy PowerShell through SCCM task sequences? Do you have any examples for best practices? So I'm not sure if that's maybe a script, like a PowerShell script.
Yeah, I'm assuming the question is related to how can we run PowerShell script in sequences. Fairly straightforward, I'll say, as well. You have a few different options. In both MDT and ConfigMgr sequences, there is a ready-made option in the sequence to add a PowerShell step. So if I go to one of my sequences here, let's see. I was doing some example with adding machine to an AD group during deployment. So I had a script that did that, PowerShell script. So I was using the run PowerShell script action, where I simply added in here, this one. And if it's a small script, I typically just put it in here directly, because the beautiful thing about that is that I don't have to specify a package, don't have to distribute a package, don't have to download a package. It's part of the sequence. But if the script is above 2 or 3 pages, I recommend to put it in a package instead and simply reference that package here when you browse to the script. But you provide parameters, you provide the execution policy, and that's one way to add a script. Other stuff I'm seeing is just running PowerShell exe as a run command line. thing. I remember one of Gary Blok's sample sequences that he published for imaging, the cleanup stuff. Let me see. I think I have them here. Here's a little snippet that cleans out the Windows temp folder. And here is just I didn't zoom very well there, did I? Just a regular run command line where we run PowerShell.exe, and the command that we want to run, in this case, a script that deletes all files that are older than 7 days. Or if it's a script that you want to run, instead of doing -command, of course, you can just do -file and the name of the script. You can even pass by or add on -execution policy and bypass. So it could be also something like this. And file, and my script.ps1, and then you specify a package where you have your script, and life is good. So either of those will work just fine to run script and sequences. Yeah, I hope that answered that question.
Very cool. Diego on YouTube also had a question. Would like to ask which server or desktop do you use for VMs?
I mean, it depends. For our classes that we where basically each student get a Hyper-V host for a week, we just use small desktops that work remarkably well for the purpose. Not that one. That was an interesting thing, by the way. There was a new release of VMware Workstation that apparently have a new TPM 2.0 chip in it that I'm about to test. I didn't have a chance to test it yet. But to go back to the question, it could be like a machine like this. You can get them used on eBay for $250. An i7, 32 gig RAM, and then you simply have to buy a 1 terabyte NVMe disk. And I recommend Samsung for those. Doesn't have to be the Pro, even though the Pro are very shiny. But the Evo or Pro, Pro is about 140 and Evo is about 100. But all in all, you get the machine that is perfectly capable of running 10 VMs. And you get that machine for a few $100s. But pretty much these days, any machine that you can get your hands on that has above i5 and equivalent CPUs. And of course, it doesn't have to be Intel. It can be an AMD Ryzen CPU as well, which actually are fantastic as Hyper-V hosts. But this minimum memory, this minimum disk, and you're off to go. If you are more committed to your lab environment, you can follow Andrew's example. You can tell us a little bit about your lab machine, Andrew.
Yep. So I happened to find a Dell T430 server, tower server, and that has Xeon CPU in it, as well as 128 gigs of RAM, and a few disks, I think 4 or 5 disks in there, and just running server 2022. So it's been pretty rock solid. Has more room for even more RAM if I need it. But to Johan's point, I mean, getting something like an Optiplex 7050, at least with an i7 and some RAM in there is a fantastic start. My T430 is a little bit of overkill, but it's fun.
But it suits the Chicago weather quite nice because it does get cold here in the winter.
Yeah, exactly. I probably, I can skip out on running the heat for an extra hour or two per day.
I mean, other machines that we've seen are popular, and I have a few of these at home, are the different interlock devices. We have talked about them many, many times here on the Academy. But they do have all different shapes and forms these days, from almost like a server, but to these devices here that actually can run a lab on. I'm not sure why it turned blue, but it's a tiny little box. It's quiet, it's powerful. You can get them with i7 or i9, so you can have 64 gigs of memory in them. You can have more memory in the big one, obviously, but they're dang good devices. Really nice. There is another. What was it? Try to remember the name. The URL. Oh yeah, TinkerTry. They're good. It's a website. We have mentioned it, I think, on the Academy before, but they focus on. Did I spell that right? I hope so. Yeah. They publish the recommendations on home lab servers, even beefier ones, for example, Supermicro servers and others. So if you search through their various recommendations, there's a treasure of information for building a home lab, for sure. So recommend that one.
Good stuff.
All right.
All right. So we have some follow-ups on the naming that you were talking about within a task sequence.
Okay.
So let's see. Hyper-V machine names in task sequence isn't working when using. Basically, it looks like a WMI query. And then populating the OSD computer name.
Okay, so it looks like they are using either an MDT sequence or a ConfigMgr sequence integrated with MDT, because the sample that was posted in the question was actually from a custom settings in a file. So I'm going to borrow that example and head over here with it. I'm still sharing the screen, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So what you can do in these environments is that if you have an MDT integration or a regular MDT light touch sequence, you can build nested sections. So if I want to do something that is specifically for a virtual machine only, I can do something like this, where I will set that OSD computer name is indeed part of my serial number. So this in custom settings in it, this means I want to run a VB script snippet as part of my naming. So if I would have something like this, I'm just typing something. And I would run this on a physical machine. Right now I'm on my physical machine. It's an HP desktop or workstation, actually. So if I would run this particular simulation, because you can simulate settings in PowerShell for MDT. If you go to the right folder, you can do that. So I'm running the gather script for this particular ini file. So just to let me show you what that script looks like. It just runs, there's a PowerShell script that runs a VB script that specifies what ini file you want to simulate. So if I go ahead and run that, it's going to detect that I'm on a desktop, and it's going to set the name to PC dash the last characters of my serial number here. But if I would take this exact same folder, I'm going to borrow this folder for a second, and copy over to a virtual machine like this one here. This is a VM. So I'm going to paste that folder onto my C drive. Might take a little bit, but all right. And then open up a PowerShell prompt. Go to the same folder, run the same simulation again. We should see a different behavior. It should detect that this indeed was a virtual machine and do that prefix instead. So you can definitely do stuff like this using rules in the inner file, like this example here. What I am seeing though more and more, not for MDT light touch customers, but for ConfigMgr customers, is that they are slowly moving away from the MDT integration because it hasn't been updated about a decade, and there seemed to be no more updating of it either. And it's based on legacy technology, VB-script and whatnot. I mean, obviously it works still, but I see a lot of organizations moving over to PowerShell script instead. So they would have a PowerShell script that does the naming, that has the same logic as the init file used to have. So basically, if virtual machine, then use this naming standard. If desktop, use this naming standard. And there are some PowerShell versions of the gather process already out there. The most common one is from Johannes Trevelius. I'm using that in some of my sequences, but it provides with the same variables, and you can use that in your own script. So it's fairly straightforward to get going. But yeah, that would be how you would do it.
Awesome. We have another question on YouTube. Can CMPivot query the local app data folder on a number of devices in a collection? We're trying to find out the different versions of Teams in our environment. Actually, happen to find a... Do you have... Do you have something, Johan?
Not on that one. You were about to say something. I think I interrupted you.
No, yeah. I happen to find a tweet from Panu, who actually has the CMPivot query to do this exact thing. It looks like, if you want to share my screen for a moment.
Yes, sir.
So it looks like he's just using the asterisk wildcard in here to look in app data of all the users.
Yeah, something that worth mentioning of those wildcards is they only work for one level, one folder that you replace.
Mm.
So if you want to check multiple, you have to have multiple queries that you set the wildcard for different folders.
Good call out.
Otherwise, yeah. So good find. That was a quick answer. That's not the best. You stumble, see it like right here. Good.
Yeah, I'll take it. Hopefully that answers the question. So I'm going to drop this in the chat quick. All right. And then we had another question from YouTube. Any examples of using PowerShell modules during OSD?
Yeah, I mean, modules are nothing different than the PowerShell script that I showed you before. You have a PowerShell script that imports the right module and then runs whatever commandlet you need in that module. There is no like built-in function in the sequence itself to say import a module. You have to go through a PowerShell script action or a run commandlet action to import PowerShell modules. But once you have them imported in the script, of course, everything in them will be available in your script. You can import modules already in WinPE, put them in such a way so they are at least loaded. You can provide a module path and whatnot in the registry of WinPE, but it's usually easier to do it in the sequence. When I were trying to get PowerShell 7 working in WinPE, I had to add in a bunch of the registry paths that are normally within a Windows machine where you have installed to get PowerShell 7 to work, but that is not really required for normal scripting. So, yeah.
All right.
Anything else?
Let me just make sure we didn't miss any here so far. Well, we definitely still have a few more minutes. 13 to be exact.
Yeah.
Did we ask, Jesse asked a question earlier. Could you give us a walkthrough of configuring deployment optimization? This would be for an Intune test tenant with 7 VMs, mix of Win 11 and Windows 10. Did we touch on that one?
No, we did not. Sorry about that. Did not mean to miss that question. Yeah, I'll be happy to. Stealing your screen again.
Alrighty.
All right. I'm stealing the screen. For those of you that arrived lately, I just wanted to mention that we are running a pretty good deal, I think, on the Academy for the last 23 hours and 11 minutes, 50% off a new PowerShell course. We do discounts very sparse on the Academy, so this is a good opportunity. But back to the question at hand. So our friends over here, this is where I have my part-time work these days. Blog here. We put together some recommendations for Intune in terms of DO settings, and these are production settings that we recommend putting in place. So if I go to an Intune tenant, and go to devices and go to configuration profiles and create one. So Windows 10, obviously. And I don't recommend picking templates, even though there is a DO template available, because it doesn't have all the settings. Whereas the settings catalog, where you typically want to do stuff anyway, has more DO settings than the templates have. So pick settings catalog, give it a decent name, and then you start to add in the different settings. So you simply search for delivery, or you scroll down and pick delivery, whatever you prefer. There is indeed a delivery optimization here. And then you start to simply go through these different settings that we have in the recommendation. So if I just put that to the side a little bit here, it's basically finding these values and configure them in this way. So for example, picking the cache size and flip it to 30, that's usually a good starting point. If you're using a cache host, you will specify that one. These two are obviously very, very critical, because these two will allow the client to look for content locally longer. Download mode, group ID, stuff like that you will configure. And other like little known scenarios like this one here doesn't make any sense when you read the description, or it's like, oh, okay, what? But if you flip that to 64, you will find that your efficiency will jump from 60% to 80%. That's something that Phil Wilcock found out after months of testing, basically. But basically, go through this little list of settings and continue and create a profile, assign it to a group or two, and then you're good. So I'm not going to go through and pick all the settings because they're fairly well documented here. But one thing I'd like to mention is the restriction selection or option that you can add. This one here. This one works on newer version of Windows, the one that we have here on the bottom. What it will do is it will change the DO client, so to speak, but the DO service in Windows to stop asking Microsoft for every file, but instead asking around local neighbors for files directly. So otherwise, every single request for a file is always going up to Microsoft, and then one of Microsoft update servers will tell your client that, actually, you shouldn't get that file from me because you have a friend over there that has it. I talked to him earlier, and then, he has it. But this one will ask directly for smaller files. So if you have a lot of packages or applications in Intune, or you have a lot of machines doing updates for applications in Windows, you will actually see less connections going through your corporate firewall when this one is configured. So you can definitely play around with that one as well. It's an interesting new technology that they added. It's almost like branch cache, but delivery optimization. Because branch cache also asks around through a broadcast on the local subnet, always. And this one does too. So, yeah. I'm not going to continue with a create a profile, but this is what you need to do, pretty much. All
Very
right.
cool. Thank you. All right. Question coming in from YouTube, looking for the best way to keep the WDS service running at all times, including restart due to Windows updates. Any ideas?
Yes. One of our customers simply set up 2 WDS servers for a location that they were serving. And in their DHCP scope settings or in their IP helper configuration, they will basically delegate half of the IP or half of the range to use one and the other half to use the other. And the idea was that that machine would try to ping pong and find the right one. But other than that, WDS, you don't restart that server that often. So if you set up your maintenance windows right in ConfigMgr and restart that server maybe 3 a.m. on a Sunday in the morning or Monday morning, I would guess, you hopefully shouldn't affect too many deployments at that point. Because otherwise, WDS is a fairly reliable service. What I found over the years is that the new provider in ConfigMgr, the WDS less Pixie provider, is actually a little bit snappier. This one is obviously on your distribution point. So it will follow your boundaries. And if your client can't find the first one, they're going to try another one. Assuming IP helper follows also. But it's tricky to build high available Pixie, because the Pixie failover kind of have to follow the ATP failover. Otherwise, it won't work. The machine still need to get an IP address.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that helped a little bit, but that's what I've seen out there, at least.
All right. Another question here on YouTube regarding licensing. Favorite topic of any Microsoft admin. As an SCCM and Intune administrator, what license do I need in Azure to manage Intune and Autopilot?
I mean, to do Autopilot, you it's basically just the standard Intune license and a shinier Azure AD Premium. Either one or two are the core license requirements.
And the Azure AD Premium specifically for the auto enrollment.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be any fancy licensing.
Yep, that should be able to take care of the autopilot scenario. All right, and then in SCCM, if a device is having application update issues, what log should I first check?
Application update issues. I'm assuming this is like traditional application deployment. It's just that it happened to be an update of an app. I hear you got some professional help right there.
Yeah, somebody came barging in here. my new office door did not help today.
Well, it's the life we live in.
That's right. I have to get one of those. I've got to get one of those red lights outside that says "on air" or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, to answer the question, shorthand version is that will be the usual how you deploy any application deployment in ConfigMgr. Everything from the log files from distributed out to DP to the different intent eval and discovery logs on the client. There are some great blog posts out there, but even the ConfigMgr doc on the topic is pretty awesome. So if you search for ConfigMgr docs and application model troubleshooting, that step-by-step guide that the team put together is absolutely great. Let's see if it was this one actually. Yeah. So it goes through each and every step of the deployment and what log files to check, what SQL queries to run, and it's just a really good step-by-step. This is what's happening. This is what you will see. These are the places you need to look at, and then this, of course, they have the same for the installation. So prior to the documentation, you have to go to a bunch of different blog sites to get the same type of information. There were a few Microsoft PFEs that wrote some blog posts. Anu had one as well. But this is just a good guide for troubleshooting for application deployments, and you will learn a lot when you go through this. In terms of the app itself, if you have really difficult installers, it sometimes helps putting them in wrappers where you can provide additional controls and checkup and logging. So the wrapper that we have showcased quite frequently here on the Academy is, and this is just an example as anything, but ConfigMgr wrapper, it's more the concept. Here is one with just some basic logging added in when you run the installer. And we do some things before and after the installation, but that can help troubleshoot. If you're having troubles with application being deployed in a sequence, you can add in things like service UI that allow you to actually run the script interactively when the sequence runs. So you can see if it's something, maybe the system account or system context causing troubles. I've seen that. But yeah, that would be my starting point on troubleshooting apps, basically. Get more info. All right, we are. Dang, that hour went by pretty quick.
I'll say. I agree.
Did your youngster have any final questions?
She didn't. She tried to explain logging to me and then trailed off and decided to take a break already. She had too much.
Yeah, I can take the best out of you.
Yeah, exactly. She wanted to start her holiday early, so
Can't blame her.
not at all.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. For those of you who are here in the US, happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and I hope to see you next Wednesday. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.